someone was trying to say, it's not a nuisance to Slipknot. I was like, well, those guys suck even worse.
Definitely don't want that in garage.
No. The last thing you want in garage. A bunch of idiots in masks playing new metal. It's like, I'd rather, could someone just hang me instead? Please.
It's like, I actually need a noose now.
Yeah.
Slipknot is in my garage.
It's like, why is this band
And they won't stop.
Why does this band have 5 drummers? Can I leave? This is terrible. Oh God, there's a DJ? Please get me out of here.
Here's the thing, alright, that can happen, where stupid people tend to overvalue their own abilities because they are too stupid to realize they don't have those abilities.
That's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, everybody. It's episode 125. Guess what we're doing this week?
안녕, 나는 총무부장이야.
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be into like all the wacky, obscure black metal that nobody's ever heard of, nobody's ever cared about. Except for me, you know, like some kind of weird fucking cybernetic neo-fascist Taiwanese porno grind or whatever the fuck. But you know what?
Fuck them. Thug life.
This week we're going to be talking about one of the Asians.
불쇼를 하고 있습니다. 와우.
No, not the Haitians. The Asians. As in bands that end in Asian. See, Sweden, what do you got? You got all the uns. You got unleashed, uncurbed, uncanny, unanimated. But in the US, specifically the Atlantic Northeast, specifically in the early 90s, you got the Asians. You got Suffocation, Incantation, Immolation. Maybe you can stretch that and include Malevolent Creation. I think they have some personnel that originate from there. But it's mainly about the 3 ones, Incantation, Immolation, Suffocation. Those are the ones I like the best. They're somewhat associated. Maybe not Suffocation as much with Incantation and Immolation, but those 2 Asians, the Asians, those are some Asians right there, man. And we're going to do Immolation this week because I like them, and there's a lot to say about them. First of all, if you've never seen Immolation live, you should go and do that because their guitarist, who's one of the only original members of the band at this point, along with Ross Dolan, but their guitarist, Robert Vigna, probably has the most imposing and sinister kind of stage presence of any death metal guitarist. He usually wears all black. He's got a spiky, nasty looking guitar. He has a very Anton LaVey-esque, if that can be an adjective, aspect to his face and facial hair. And he does all kinds of just like weird, angular, sharp, almost kind of like robot-like motions in time with like the strange string bendy stuff he's doing musically, and it's just a sight to behold. They're an old band. They've been around forever, and unlike a lot of bands, particularly the other 2 Asians, if you ask me, it's not like they put out, you know, like 3 or 4 good albums in the 90s and then sort of just started repeating themselves later in their career to the point where you don't really need to listen to their later stuff. No, Immolation have consistently evolved and done interesting things, so there's a lot to talk about over the course of their career. They started out as Rigor Mortis, but then, like 1987, there's another band called Rigor Mortis from Texas who are also very interesting. So they changed their name to fucking Immolation, and I want to say 1991-ish, they put out their first album, Dawn of Possession. One of the hallmarks of all 3 of the big Asian bands is their penchant for crafting slightly more complex death metal compared to their Floridian and Swedish counterparts. Immolation, however, might win the battle on that. Suffocation might be more rhythmically complex, but in terms of song composition, especially on this earlier effort of theirs, these guys are big into very classical music style build-ups, like this one right here, which of course goes into a nasty turnaround. You can hear quite a bit of a Voivod influence in Robert Vigna's very distinctive dissonant riffing style. It's dissonant in the intervals it uses, but the way that the music is constructed is actually very melodic and memorable, which probably made them stick out the most to me of the 3 Asian bands in my death metal youth. very memorable sorts of melodies going on in these songs. You'd be humming that in your sleep. What happens a little bit later on in the song? Back into that nasty little pinch harmonic laden transition riff, and I really like Ross Dolan's vocals. He's actually very understandable for such a nasty sounding chap. Also nice kind of slow rollicking mid-paced blast beats from Craig Smilowski, who's only on this album. Later on went on to join Masada with ex-Grand Belial's key members. And here's where you can see Robert Vigna's inimitable soloing style. He's right up there with Trey Azagthoth in terms of just, like, you can tell in a death metal band where it's him doing solos. In fact, he might be my favorite soloist. So after this album came out, like, it's in an unfortunate spot in death metal history because it's Roadrunner Records decided to be a bunch of dickheads and drop all their death metal bands, start signing crap like Slipknot and Nickelback and whatever the fuck. Oh, fuck that bitch! So we didn't hear anything more from Immolation on their particular label. Don't get too excited. They did come back eventually on Listenable Records, that French label of all places. It took them a few years to the point where they put out their sophomore release in the middle of a death metal drought in the mid-90s. But it's a real good one. It shows their sound evolving quite a bit. It's called Hereinafter. So, of course, it's fast and furious and dissonant and whatnot. But on this album, they really started developing those little shards of melody that you heard on the first 4 songs on Dawn of Possession. Interesting thing about Dawn of Possession, like the first 4 songs are all new, the other ones are all from demos, and you can tell the difference. Here on this one, everything has these little smatterings of eerie sounding melody scattered throughout. A medley of melodies, if you will. And just really cool transitions like this. Utilizing artificial harmonics as melodic parts of riffs instead of just for accent notes. Which gives it that weird signature Robert Vigna feel. I really like Rob Vigna. Watch how this transitions into the next riff. This is really cool. That little tremolo thing here goes into, how fucking cool is that? I don't know. I really dig this album. I even like the cover art quite a bit, which is done by Andreas Marshall, who's probably more famous for doing a lot of power metal album covers for bands like Gravedigger, but he also did Obituary's The End Complete, which is apparently the best-selling death metal t-shirt design of all time, and he was an Immolation staple for like the next few albums, and he did a really good job, you know? These kind of apocalyptic landscapes are very interesting and unique, particularly when compared to like all the Dan Seagraves and Christian Wallens of the world. For the 3 albums after the first 2, so the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Immolation albums, they experienced their first of many major league lineup changes that substantially altered the sound of the band. Craig Smilowski leaves, and we get Alex Hernandez, whom some of you might recognize from other bands.
그리고 진짜 제가 해보고 싶은 게
Ooh, I do like this one. Very nice early 90s death metal production. Bass heavy. The triggered kicks actually add to the overall dehumanized atmosphere, but I regret to inform you that that is not the right guy.
근데 솔직히 어느 정도 맞는 것 같긴 해요.
That's a different guy. That's Alex Marquez from Malevolent Creation. We got 2 Ez's. We got 3 Ations. Very confusing 90s death metal stuff going on here. Alex Hernandez, not to be confused with Alex Marquez, was in a band called Fallen Christ, who played a particularly nasty style of kind of crossover grindcore and black metal, which had lots of dissonant bits reminiscent of a substantially sped up Immolation, so he's a natural fit for the band. Also worth noting, Fallen Christ, actually pretty interesting stuff. See, this sounds a lot like fucking Immolation right here. But if you haven't heard Fallen Christ, check them out. Their album got reissued relatively recently, and I think it's still available cheaply. But this Alex Hernandez at the drum helm version of Immolation is probably my favorite incarnation of the band. They put out 3 albums, Failures for Gods, Close to a World Below, and Unholy Cult. The second of those is undoubtedly my favorite Immolation album. It's a well-regarded classic of death metal by people that have been into it for a while, and we're gonna fucking listen to it. This is the first song I ever heard from Immolation. It's called Higher Coward, and it's frankly amazing. The drumming really links in with the guitar as well. You notice he has that little cymbal flourish at the end of this kind of swirling morass of guitar noise. Very orchestral in nature. Feels very thought out compared to some of the more mindless death metal that might be out there. Although I do like the really primitive mindless stuff too, like Jungle Rot and whatnot, don't get me wrong. But this kind of stuff scratches a certain itch that is left wholly unscratched by almost every other band in death metal. Sheets of sound as opposed to just kind of blasting and grooving stuff. I like it quite a lot.
I'm gonna join the Nazis.
Later on in the song, you can hear why, in addition to Robert Vinia being perhaps my favorite death metal guitarist, Alex Hernandez is unquestionably one of my favorite death metal drummers. I know people like to talk about Flo Mounier, Mike Smith, Nika Anderson, but for me it's Hernandez, because check this out. This is like almost like something you'd hear on a Neurosis album, these rolling tom, like weird mixed up tribal things he's doing. I don't know, I haven't heard anything else quite like it in death metal, and I'm a big fan of it.
That's what she gets for pirating my videos.
Here's the closing song. It's 8 minutes long. It's called Close to a World Below because it's the title track. This album's actually very well paced. It's well worth listening to the entire thing, but the opening and closing tracks are perhaps my favorite, along with Put My Hand Into the Fire. I don't know, the whole album's great, but look at this. One of them epic Immolation build-ups. Feels like jets of magma just swirling up out of the earth. See, this feels like, I've seen piano versions of this. It feels very similar to maybe just a really epic piece of classical music, but done with guitars, bass, and drums, and Ross Dolan going over it. Look how they're just like adding on all these layers, making it more and more epic and spooky. Nice little drum fill there too. That felt really cool. This whole album feels just really good to listen to. You could see a conductor doing the waving his arms with the da-na-na part. I don't know, very Herbert von Karajan. Maybe that's just me, but that's the feel I get from it. Don't worry, the death metal's still there, folks. Really dig this linking riff here. Hooks together these more nasty, standard death metal-y sounding sections, but that kind of swoopy motif that first came up with the intro riff is still an integral part of the song. It all feels very undulating. That's a good $5 word, right? That intro riff will become very important towards the end of the song, everybody.
Do I know why?
Because it gets brought back as this cool lead guitar line. Very mournful, desolate, just nasty, apocalyptic way to close the album out, and I am a huge fan of it. In fact, this is an expansion on an idea they had on the album right before this. So here's the last song on Failures for Gods. And it has that same idea where you have this lone kind of darkly melodic guitar line encompassed by these sheets of sound. So it was cool that they took this idea and added the Wagnerian leitmotif concept to it. Failures for God's also a good album. These kind of like shuddering sheets of sound I definitely think probably were a big influence on the Australian band Portal, but I like Immolation more than I like Portal because I can actually tell what the fuck's going on. So after Unholy Cult, unfortunately Alex Hernandez leaves and we get Steve Shality, and who does a good job, but I still really miss Alex's particular style of drumming. But we also get a new member, a new co-guitarist. We get Bill Taylor, who you might remember from Angel Corpse. Angel Corpse, of course, being one of two bands that formed out of the ashes of the war metal band Order from Chaos. And I might like Ares Kingdom more than I like Angel Corpse. That's the other band that formed out of the split of that band. But Angel Corpse is still really good stuff. Kind of a weird middle ground between something like pure Holocaust era Immortal and the more chaotic moments of early Morbid Angel. So I don't know, everybody's heard Angel Corpse. They're pretty fucking famous, but if you haven't, check them out. But anyway, so you get Bill Taylor in from Angel Corpse, leading to an interesting development in Immolation sound.
언제쯤 데뷔할 수 있을까라는 생각은 당연히 많이 했고.
Yeah, I know technically Bill Taylor is on Unholy Cult, but it's with Harnessing Ruin that their style really switches up, and it becomes a lot more impact-oriented compared to the more atmospheric, classical, musically stuff of old. Instead, this almost feels kind of heavy metal-ish in terms of the more simple construction and the emphasis on just kind of anticipation leading into hard-hitting riff, leading back into anticipation, just back and forth, very Merciful Fate-ish, but I enjoy it. I think the best album from this era is probably Shadows in the Light. I know I'm gonna get shit for that. A lot of people prefer Majesty and Decay to Shadows in the Light, but maybe I just have more of an emotional attachment to this album. Or maybe I just really enjoy the way the lead guitar integrates into the compositions on this one. Like what you're hearing right now, that's pretty fucking cool. It's not even really conventional soloing, it's more just like an extra layer of melody being brought into the chaos. This album's more groove-oriented than their older stuff, sure, but it still remains fairly intellectual. Do you want to hear some more of that dank fucking lead guitar, everybody? This right here is one of my favorite moments in the entire Immolation discography. Look at this. So many layers of interesting things going on. Even the bass is doing cool stuff. And this winding melody just kind of swooping in and around the rest of the music. Almost compare it to a very, very, very dark and blasphemous version of 80s Fate's Warning, maybe. These cool little bendy things he does. Such a fucking big fan of that. So Shadows in the Light, probably my favorite from that era of Immolation, but it's all been pretty good. Bill Taylor has since left, but the music's still good. You still got the core of Ross Dolan and Robert Vigna. There's been a few bands influenced by the darker and stranger moments of Immolation's discography. In the death metal realm, of course, we have like Zealotry, Cthulhiist, and Blood Incantation, but perhaps the most interesting band that took a lot of influence from Immolation wasn't even a death metal band, it's a black metal band, Verse Sephra. From Tejas, or Texas, they're Texians. And they're probably one of the most notable American black metal bands. And these guys have explicitly stated that the biggest influence on their particular method of crafting nasty sounding melodies is Immolation, which you could definitely hear on this album. This song from this album, but all their songs on pretty much all their albums except for the demo, which was a little bit more like Emperor with the keyboard parts taken out. That's some really cool stuff, though. Just weird, ambient, nasty, black metal spookiness. And I think the main thing they improved on with the Immolation template was the lyrics. Immolation was more just about kind of like a very militant and haughty brand of atheism, which I generally agree with, but doesn't really fit the occult spooky nature of their music. Averse Sephira is specifically an inversion of the Sephiroth, you know, those little circles on that Jewish diagram, clipothic, whatever the fuck thingy that Madonna fucking enjoys so much. They're the Averse Sephira, and so when you do that kind of stuff, it makes for slightly more occult and spooky lyrical content. One of the coolest things that happened with Averse Sephira is on their final album, they actually got Ross Dolan from Immolation to provide some nicely contrasting guest vocals. See, there he is. And then there's Sanguine Mapsama. So you got black metal and death metal vocals kind of fighting back and forth. Unfortunately, Averse Sephira is no longer around. They've since split up, and the main composers are now more active in the newly reformed Texas black and death metal stalwarts Imprecation, which is not someone saying the word implication in a goofy, kawaii Japanese accent. So check out Immolation, check out Averse Sephira, check out Imprecation, check out all these fucking bands. Fallen Christ, they're all good, you fucking dork.
See you later.